Well, good afternoon. I'm sorry for the slightly late start for those of you who logged in at 3:30. Welcome to the second in my series of Meet the Candidate, although in reality it's meeting the candidate, meeting other candidates this week in the form of Mr. Ivan McKee, who I'm sure is well known to you all as the Minister for Trade, Innovation and Public Finance. Now, in terms of format today, Ivan and I are going to have a good old chat over a whole range of areas, big policy development that he's been working on. And again, there will be the chance for you to ask questions, which we'll take towards the end of the programme. So welcome, Ivan. It's great to see you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Michelle. Good afternoon and great to be here.
Yeah, well, we obviously know each other, but I just happen to know that you've got quite an unusual CV for a government minister in that you've had a long business career, which I know shapes what you can contribute. But I think it would be useful for our listeners to understand more about your background and your business career. So perhaps you could enlighten us a bit more about that.
Yes, well, before I came into politics, and I was only elected in 2016, I had campaigned during the independence referendum, but before that I wasn't involved in politics really at all for a long time. I had a career in business and manufacturing, working for a number of manufacturing businesses, and then latterly running my own consultancy business and traveling the world and doing turnaround for different businesses. So that was my career up until about, I started campaigning in the referendum when I ended up spending increasing the amounts of my time on that campaign. And at the end of that, I made the decision to put it all to good use by getting myself elected to Parliament.
Am I correct in thinking you study mathematics? Is that right?
No, not maths, engineering and business at Strathclyde. And went from there.
I think I must have got the idea from that, from the very funny clip where you had an exchange with Murdo Fraser in the Parliament and you challenged him on some mathematical equation. I actually tried to find it on YouTube to play it today because it was so funny. Perhaps you could remind us about what the dispute was about.
Yeah, well, that was one of these things that Murdo thought he was being very clever by talking about the Laffer curve, which, as some of you may know what that is, it's a relationship between the amount of tax you raise depending on what tax rate you charge. And the Tory argument is as you reduce tax rates, you're going to generate more tax revenue. But of course, the Laffer curve is quite a bit more complicated than that. Murdo, of course, didn't really understand it beyond the soundbite. So I talked him through how the curve was made up.
But it was that you said, and I seem to remember there was silence in the chamber, and he kind of looked at you. And I know he did try to retort, but not very successfully.
Well, I said he couldn't hear the question.
Oh, that was it. Yeah. And what can you remember what the question was?
Yeah, it was to do with the rate of change, and it's I was going to say obviously, but it's differential calculus. So depending on the point of inflection of the curve, there reaches a point where it does become the case that the higher the tax rate, the less tax you raise. But that point, you need to know where that point is, and Murdo obviously had no clue where it was. And the point we were making was that we were still increasing tax rates as we have done in Scotland, Highland, the rest of the UK, but we continue to generate extra tax as a consequence of that. Exactly.
No, it was very funny, and so hopefully it is on YouTube somewhere because it would be worth watching again. So then, you and I met in the first independence referendum it was probably about 2012, I think.
Right at the end of 2012, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And so, did you know at that point that you were going to end up being in politics full time, or what was your thinking about your involvement?
No, it's quite interesting. I mean, I had no idea, and I was obviously I'd had a look as the referendum came to the fore to try and understand a bit more about the arguments for and against, and it became quite apparent to me fairly quickly that there was a very, very solid case for Scotland to be independent. And I looked at it from a business perspective. If Scotland was a business, Is it a business that could stand on its own 2 feet? Is it a business that you think would do well, and was well placed with the right assets and the right opportunity and so on? And I had a good look at the numbers as well, and it became fairly obvious to me fairly quickly that it was a very, very strong case and an opportunity not to be missed. So I went along to it was a Business for Scotland meeting in the Yes offices in Hope Street. And I just went along to be part of the audience. And I remember, as you do, volunteering for something at some point, and then you kind of get sucked in. Before you know it, you're getting put out to do debates and radio and television and all kinds of stuff. So it very rapidly led to a position where I was travelling the length and breadth of the country doing public meetings, which was great fun. Really enjoyed it, and had to learn the political skill set fairly quickly. And it got to the end of that, and I suppose I made a decision. I hadn't even joined the SNP at that point. I made a decision after the referendum that at this point in my career, if I wanted to be in politics, now was the time to go and do it. So I put myself forward for selection. Originally in 2015 when I wasn't successful, but then 2016 where I was and got a Holyrood seat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course I remember, in fact, it's been mentioned on Indie Live, which is one of the streams that's going out today, that presentation you and I did in the Glad Cafe in Glasgow, where you talked about the economics and I talked a bit about the culture. And I mean, that certainly appears pretty high. When you search on Ivan McKee, that's one of the first videos that comes up, the facts that you presented there. And I think this concept about, you know, if Scotland was our business, how would we be running our business? And I remember remarking to somebody, well, what you wouldn't be doing is giving away a huge percentage of accountability and responsibility for your bottom line to your nearest competitor. And all that kind of language I know we used a lot during the independence referendum, and it definitely did have some reach into the business community that the business guys kind of understood, didn't they?
Absolutely, and it was all about exactly that. I mean, the entrepreneurial aspect of that, standing on your own 2 feet, making your own decisions, taking responsibility for what you do, and that really chimed with the business community. And I think for a lot of people, it was a very different way of looking at it because they come from a traditional business background, very often, obviously, perhaps with maybe a Tory background, because that's where they kind of been politically. But when you explained it to them in business terms, a lot of people really made a lot of sense. And that video was quite amazing because I think it ended up at more than 100,000 views, which were 35 minutes of talking about economics, was quite remarkable. And it got to the point people were stopping me in the street and saying, "You're that guy on that video, aren't you?" So yeah, it was quite bizarre, but I think it really made a difference because a lot of people weren't convinced on the economic side of things, and I think that helped change a lot of minds and move a lot of people to yes. Yeah,
and I remember I used sort of terminology. I was talking about your SWOT analysis. For people listening to this who are not involved in business, you'll often do that, create a sort of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats if you're about to go into a new endeavour or make a significant change. And of course, the narrative at that point was all about kind of the risks or the threats, if you like. But I was always wanting to talk about, yeah, fair enough, look at that, but also look at the opportunities that were being presented. And again, I think talking about as your SWOT analysis helped as well. And as you say, that was quite unusual terminology for people to be using at the time. So your official title is now Minister for Trade, Innovation and Public Finance. So what does that entail?
Well, it's quite a lengthy list because, I mean, obviously I was made a minister in 2018 and was given responsibility for trade, investment and innovation. And then there was a reshuffle, various things happened in December of last year, and I got the public finance piece as well, along with a few other things. So effectively, I've been hugely involved through the trade aspects in Brexit and all the developments that have been happening there. How we grow Scotland's exports, and we've done some great work on that. How we attract more inward investment into Scotland, and we've got a real pretty thorough action plan and strategy we've developed over the last year or so on that. And on the innovation piece, how we work with some of Scotland's really exciting new sectors, be that our space sector, which is a real hidden gem, something that not many people know about, but Scotland's in a very, very strong place globally there. Our life science sector and so many Scottish businesses have been right at the fore in developing vaccines, cures and treatments, and supporting the test effort in the fight against COVID, and our data and digital tech sectors, which again are very well placed. So all of those innovation sectors, plus I've now got responsibility for digital, and we're launching a new digital strategy later this month for Scotland, and also for public sector procurement, which is really a very important aspect that we need to make more of, leveraging the amount of money we spend in the public sector in Scotland, about 12 or 13 billion pounds a year, to make sure as much of that as possible gets diverted to support the development of Scottish businesses. So quite a broad range, but really fascinating, and I think it really makes a difference as well in terms of the impact it makes on Scottish business, economic growth, employment prospects, and many other aspects.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered a huge area there in terms of your responsibility. So I'd like to kind of delve into a few of them in a bit more detail, if you don't mind. First of all, you mentioned Brexit. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people say, oh, not Brexit again, but it seems to me that when we're looking at import and export and trade and supply chains and so on, a lot of people, unless they're involved in business, don't understand what Brexit has disabled. We've heard a lot of talk about what it's enabled, but some of the trading partnerships are, they certainly don't meet the proximity test in being nearby to us. So I suppose I'd like your take from a Scottish business perspective of what Brexit means.
No, absolutely. It's well, the first thing I say is there aren't really any upsides. When you hear about all these trade deals that have been negotiated, the background to that is the EU had negotiated trade deals with about 40 different countries over previous years, and the UK, being part of the EU, benefited from those trade deals. So when we left the EU, we not only left the EU as our biggest trading partner and lost all the benefits of that trading relationship, we also would have lost all of those trade deals with those 40 odd other countries as well. So all that's been happening over the last couple of years, whenever the UK announces a new trade deal, is they've just been replacing, cutting and pasting the deal that the EU had with those third countries, just so we don't lose that as well. And they haven't even got all of those in place. So there are a number of those that they've not managed to replicate. So it's all been about trying to stand still and not go too far backwards with regard to those what they call new trade deals. And the relationship with the EU, there's a deal in place of sorts, but it's a pretty weak deal, and the EU holds a lot of the cards there, as we'll see start to happen with any disputes or any issues that come along. But what it does mean is it just makes it harder for business to be able to export. Now, there's more paperwork, there's more delays. We've seen that with the fishing sector, obviously, is a clear example, but many other sectors. And I've got a business in my own constituency, employs about 30 odd people. It's been there for 30 something years. And they export textiles, but because they import some of those materials before they export them, they get caught in some of the technicalities round about what they call rules of origin. So they've gone from a place where everything was easy and very straightforward before, and they could export to the EU without paperwork. Now it's an absolute nightmare because they need to put the paperwork in place. There's all kinds of random charges get brought up, and because you're outside the EU, every one of the 27 countries can put their own requirements. So they're sending stuff to Italy is different from the Netherlands, different from Germany. They're getting random charges dropped on them, their product when it arrives. Customers clearly are not happy about this. So the whole business, unfortunately, is looking at relocating everything to the Republic of Ireland, because it's much easier for them to do that, which is very, very sad. And there'll be countless examples like that, the length and breadth of Scotland. So it's having a real impact. It's been really masked by COVID up to now, because of everything else that's been happening. But I think as this unwinds over the next year or two, we'll see a real just drip feed of damage being done, which is very, very bad.
Yeah, and I suppose it's my perception at the moment that for many businesses, as we know, and we used to quote a lot, over 99% of businesses are SMEs, and many of them are micro businesses, just sort of 1 to 4 people, and many of them don't export or import. But when myself and Roger Mullen looked at it, we did a piece of work into Brexit. And one of the things we realised that businesses didn't understand their own supply chains. And so although they were not directly affected, if they were using any kind of goods themselves, it may be that their supply chain changes. Who's supplying them might have been bringing it in from Europe, and costs are therefore going to go up. And all of this extra red tape, extra paperwork costs more time, therefore costs more money, and will inevitably be passed on to the consumer. Is that something that you'll agree with?
No, it's absolutely right, and you're quite right. In so many businesses, be it manufacturing, be it life science we've talked about, be it that textile business I was talking about, food and drink, obviously. In so many of those, there's a lot of products that are imported to be made into the finished product and then exported again. And that situation is it really is made much more difficult and much more complicated. And it's that red tape, it's not having the predictability to know what's going to happen next, and having to deal with different sets of requirements across all those different countries in Europe, which is really making it very difficult for so many businesses across many sectors.
And as you point out, it's being masked at the moment by COVID. And do you anticipate that just over time, people will start to notice more and more things are different, rather than a cataclysmic kind of falling off the shelf, as some people anticipated the point at which we came out of Europe?
I think there's a real mixture there. Obviously, there was effectively a cataclysmic problem with the fishing sector, which was fairly obvious at the start, and that continues. And other sectors, what you'll see is that there'll be missed opportunities. So business growth that would have happened won't happen. Businesses that were here will decide to go elsewhere. And at the end of the day, if you're in France or Germany and you're buying stuff from Scotland, but you can get something similar from Italy or Spain or somewhere else, it's much easier just to go and buy it from somewhere else in Europe, because you don't have to worry about all the uncertainty, the delays, the paperwork, the extra charges, and so on and so forth. So that will hurt. And it's a lot of it will be that missed opportunity, things that we won't get, job opportunities we won't have because of those decisions that were made about Brexit.
Yeah, and so you mentioned digital in terms of your portfolio. I imagine that digital is one of those areas that Brexit will have less of an impact by its very nature. What sort of work are you doing in that area?
Yeah, well, I mean, interestingly, even there's a lot of stuff about the export of services and people that want to go and work as contractors internationally. That's been really disrupted, so that hits the tech sector. And there's a lot of issues about data sharing as well. And the UK is having to negotiate with the EU to get what they call a data adequacy agreement. So that means that we're able to share data between the UK and the EU. Businesses are able to share that data across those boundaries. And that's not been completely nailed down yet. So there's still a lot of uncertainty around about what's happening there. So that can impact all kinds of businesses, any businesses that use data, taking online bookings or e-commerce or anything like that can be impacted by that as well. So even in something like that, where you think, well, there's not product moving, so it's okay, there can be significant impacts as well. But leaving that to one side and looking at where we're at with digital, I mean, it's really exciting because it's very broad ranging. There's a lot of work going on, not just about connectivity and getting rolling out super fast broadband across the country, supporting digital businesses to become tech businesses to be able to generate more exciting products that they can sell globally. The main bulk of businesses that aren't in the digital sector need to digitise more and use the technology more across their day-to-day businesses. That's a big part of it as well. There's also a lot of stuff around about digital inclusion, and we've seen that, for example, with work from home, with school pupils working and studying at home, and how much access to internet connectivity and devices that exist in the general population. So that's a real issue, and also the ethics of data is hugely important as well. And how data is managed and made safe and secure, but also made available as well. And I think Scotland's in an interesting place because we've got that combination of a high ethical standards and well-developed processes for that, along with the tech side of it as well, to be able to process the data. So I think that combination puts Scotland in a really interesting place globally to be a real leader in terms of ethical data use, which again presents another exciting business opportunity on the back of that as well.
Yeah, and you've touched with the use of the word ethical in something that interests myself and Roger Mullen very much. And I know we pointed out in the work we did for Scottish Business Network about the international Scottish global business diaspora, that Scotland's reputation on the world stage was characterised by people understanding that business people in Scotland are ethical and trustworthy to do business with. And I know we made the comment that that is something you can trade on, that, you know, it's so important that you have a secure environment, you know, in terms of how peaceful your country is, but that you can trust the people you trade with. And we were pointing out, and I noticed the Scottish Government, some of the documentation points out that good governance is very important in the work that you're doing, and you've made that one of your kind of key planks, as I understand, haven't you?
Absolutely, and that's right, and it's really interesting that it refers back to the work that you and Roger did, which really brought that to the fore. Having that reputation is hugely important. People being able to trust when they do business with you, having a legal system that people can rely on and trust, transparency and openness, that really goes a long way to build those business relationships and help us develop our business growth in Scotland. So placing that ethics at the core of what we do is tremendously important. We produced our trade vision document just a few weeks ago, and that looks exactly at that. It looks at how Scotland trades in an ethical way, in a fair way. It recognises that global trade is good, but there are sometimes winners and losers. There are challenges that arise from that, and it's about how you manage that and deal with that, and are seen to do that. So I think again that really just positions Scotland in a very strong place to be able to continue to be ethical in the way we trade, to use that to help build those trusting relationships, and again to use that to help take forward business growth opportunities.
And you've kind of indirectly led on to another area I wanted to explore with you, this concept of not just doing business, but how we do our business, and your recent statements about Greenports and how you're going to differentiate the free port strategy of the Tories, which obviously some people have concerns about tax implications and so on, that they could be used for avoiding tax. And you've got some interesting themes about that. It'd be useful if you would talk through that a bit.
No, absolutely. And you're right, the free port model, I mean, it's very mixed, and there's hundreds and hundreds of free ports around the world, including 80 still in the European Union. And the UK had free ports until 2012. So the Tory argument that we can only do this because of Brexit is a nonsense at the start. But we look at that as being an opportunity to help economic growth, largely because what it does is it allows you to identify a sector and a location. So it's about regional economic development across Scotland, areas of Scotland that have got specific skills and specific assets or talents and great businesses and so on, that they're able to build those clusters that can attract other businesses, other investment to come and be part of that. So we see that regional focused cluster building economic development strategy has been very important. But what we've also done with the Greenport concept is to make it very clear that businesses that are operating in those environments isn't a race to the bottom. It's actually the opposite of that, because what we want to have there is these high productivity, high technology, high wage businesses and sectors. So we've made some real strong requirements in there about businesses have to pay the real living wage. They have to sign up to our business pledge, the Fair Work First agenda, and that addresses all kinds of issues from no zero hours contracts, tackling the gender pay gap, meaningful employee engagement in the workplace and representation, strong community engagement, and also very much a real requirement to have a robust plan to move towards net zero, which obviously a very strong focus of Scottish economic development strategy. So all of that together, I think we've got a model that is going to be really help to move forward economic development, the Fair Work agenda, and our net zero aspirations in a coherent way.
Well, obviously, I'm going to be making a blatant pitch for Grangemouth, as you might appreciate, given that that may very well be in my constituency. But I think because we started a little late, what we're going to do is have a short break where we're going to show my crowdfunding video. And then when we come back, I want to invite our audience in to take some questions from us both. I suspect we'll return to this topic though. So, okay, so hopefully if our tech works okay, you're going to be able to watch my crowdfunding video. This election is the most important in my lifetime. Scotland stands on the cusp of change. Without change and without the powers to make the changes we want to see, Scotland will be held back. We've been forcibly removed from the EU against our wishes. The cruel injustices of Westminster have been laid bare during the COVID pandemic. The Tories knowingly and deliberately work against the interests of Scotland, and the Scottish branch office of the Labour Party stands idly by. So this election is about choices, Scotland's choices. We need to choose the people we send to Holyrood, and they need to choose what to do when they get there. We need people who can deliver on Scotland's choices. We need people who can stand up and be counted. And we need people who will focus relentlessly on the North Star of self-determination. I need your help. I need your help to reach as many people as possible in Falkirk East and encourage them to vote SNP. Please support my crowdfunder. This election is different and it's more expensive. We need to use targeted social media and we need to deliver our leaflets via the Royal Mail. Please help. No amount is too small. Let's make Scotland's future about Scotland's choices. Let's make part of that choice Michelle Thomson representing the SNP in Falkirk East. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about public sector procurement. That's understood to have been a bit of an issue for some time in terms of the process. Are you able to share any early thinking about what changes you might make?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when you actually look at it objectively, Scotland's fairly advanced in terms of how we deal with this. If you look at the data for how many orders go to SMEs in Scotland, small and medium-sized enterprises, how many orders go to Scottish businesses, the focus we've got on that, the data we publish on that, we're actually further ahead than most jurisdictions in terms of what we do there, but there's an awful lot more that we can do. Now, the challenges you've got, obviously, is that to be able to trade internationally, you need to be open also to, on an equal basis for international companies to be able to sell their products to the public sector in Scotland, and that's only fair if Scottish businesses are going to export to public sector buyers around the globe. We need to be open as well, and there are obviously rules in place internationally to enable that to happen. But the trick is to be able to focus how you manage that procurement to be able to make it as easy as possible for Scottish businesses. Now that can be round about supporting Scottish businesses that have got really good innovative ideas, and we've seen that in terms of PPE, we've seen it in terms of the life science sector I've spoke about, but right across a whole range of sectors where we've got that innovation in Scotland, and we almost design the procurement process so it's able to help those businesses get a start and get their new products first of all trialled in the Scottish public sector, and then that allows them to develop and take that internationally, giving Scottish businesses good line of sight as to what's coming down the track in terms of purchase orders really helps as well, because that means they can position themselves and be in a good place when those requirements go live, to be able to take advantage of it. And also changing the criteria, so as we put more focus, and we've done quite a bit of this and we can do more focus on issues like carbon footprint, which obviously of course usually helps suppliers that are closer to home. The amount of service you can provide around with a product, which obviously means if you're in close proximity, it's easier to do that, and the quality of the product as well, of course, making those higher criteria than just looking at the basic price, if you like. So by the combination of those factors, there's more and more we can do, and it's about, I think, joining it up so that the procurement professionals in the public sector who are very good understand what it is we need to do to help Scottish businesses, and likewise Scottish businesses can get line of sight as to what the procurement professionals are doing, and we're able to be a bit more coherent about it. So a lot of good work happening there, and I think that we'll be able to make good further progress on that over the months and years to come.
And you sort of took the words out of my mouth when I was going to ask if it was being viewed as an opportunity to further shape the climate change agenda, sustainability, and so on. But you've clearly set that out, that as part of any application, people are able to articulate how it will fit into the larger strategic goals.
Absolutely, and again, that's important and very legitimate to do that, because we've got very ambitious targets for net zero by 2045, higher 5 years earlier than the rest of the UK, some of the most ambitious targets anywhere in the world. So it's perfectly legitimate that those criteria form part of procurement decisions as well, and that is something that we increasingly focused on. Yeah,
no, that's really useful to know. One last area that we didn't have a chance to discuss earlier was around space, which you mentioned. And again, I'm aware there's a lot of activity here, but it would be useful to hear your thoughts about what is in development and what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and people obviously read what they read about space or on newspapers or the television, and it's often focused around about the kind of big picture stuff, big rockets, it could be manned space flight and so on and so forth. What Scotland's focused on is smaller satellites, and it's about mostly collecting data that's very much used for environmental and climate change aspects. So being able to count the number of trees in a forest from space, or being able to track ice flow movement, or other aspects of global warming, or weather patterns, or agricultural features that help with food production globally. So a lot of it's very, very focused on those environmentally and socially useful aspects. We manufacture more satellites in Glasgow than anywhere in the world outside of California, which is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Know that. They are typically quite small, this kind of size, jam-packed full of very, very fancy electronics and all kinds of gizmos. But we're right at the cutting edge of that technology. We manufacture those in Glasgow in large numbers, and they get launched into space. Currently, they get launched from sites around the world, but because of Scotland's geography, as you can imagine, in the north of Scotland, we've got good access to those polar orbits and so on. It puts us in a very good place to be able to launch satellites as well. So at the moment, there are 5 different spaceports in Scotland that are all looking to get set up and take advantage of those opportunities. And that ranges from Shetland and Sutherland and the Western Isles, who are looking at vertical launch, or firing straight up, and then Prestwick and Mannish at horizontal launch, so you take off similar to an airplane. So all of those spaceports are moving forward. Hopefully there'll be several of them will become live in the next couple of years, which will put Scotland in a really good place, not just to manufacture the satellites, but to launch them as well. We've got now 2 rocket manufacturers in Scotland, Orbix up in Forres and Skyrora just outside Edinburgh, who are very well developed in terms of their rocket manufacturing. So we're able to put them on Scottish rockets, if you like, to take them into space. But the biggest part of the sector actually is the data analysis once you get the data back down from space. And again, Scotland's got huge strengths there in Glasgow, Edinburgh and elsewhere because of the digital and the tech skills we have. There's many businesses now that are working on satellite tracking, bringing the data back, analysing that data and then feeding that data out to the various uses we talked about, be it climate change, environmental, agriculture and other tracking activity that's going on globally. So it's a real joined up sector, and as we get the spaceports in play, then we've got all elements of that from end to end, which very few countries in the world have got. So it puts us in a really strong place to attract a lot of investment into that sector. So if you haven't heard about Scotland's space sector, you're going to be hearing more and more about it over the years to come.
It sounds very exciting, and I can understand what you're saying about the data analysis as well. Sometimes we forget just how superlative our education system is. And our universities internationally recognised. So that sounds like it's a fantastic opportunity for Scotland to do something brilliantly and export it to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. It's and while we're on universities, another fun fact: Scotland has more top universities per head of population than any other country in the world. So I love putting that fact out there. It really just talks to the excellence of those academic institutions, and our colleges are pretty good as well.
And I was about to say that Forth Valley College, which feeds not just the Falkirk area, it's got a fantastic footprint in the community as well as being an excellent educational establishment, and with a new site and so on. And the colleges are doing great work as well.
Well, tell you a story about that. When the Lighthouse Lab, which is the testing lab that we have in Glasgow for COVID, was set up. It was Forth Valley College that was supporting a lot of the training of the clinical staff to work in that facility. It's grown very fast. It's the most successful of all the UK testing labs, and it's a real testament to everybody that's been working on that. So another great Scottish success story.
Oh, well, that's really useful to know. I'll make sure that gets passed on, your positive messages. Now, I see that we've got a couple of questions coming in that we should probably pick up. One, just cutting to the chase in terms of politics, is how we get across the importance of both votes SNP. I've got my thoughts, but I'd like your thoughts as well about how we do that.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is that if we get everybody that votes SNP on the first vote to vote SNP on the second vote, we're going to get extra seats on top of that on the list. That's the challenge we've got, persuading people that is what they should do. But that's the reality of it. If we got those numbers, if everybody that voted in the constituency SNP also voted on the list, we'd get those extra top-up seats, which would make a real difference perhaps in getting us that majority and getting us a bigger majority, which is going to make all the difference in the battle ahead to get the independence referendum and to win it.
And I think the point I make is that using that strategy was what got us the first independence referendum, because we had a majority, which, as you know, the D'Hondt system, it makes it quite hard. So, but using that strategy meant that we got the first independence referendum. And given, I've made it quite clear, my focus is absolutely about encouraging people to think positively about independence. That is absolutely my driver. So of course that's what everybody wants. So we're agreed on that, both votes SNP. There's another question here from Amanda Napier, who says, I'd like to ask Mr. McKee why he thinks independence will help our international competitiveness and exports.
Well, it's really interesting. If you look at the history of Ireland, right, as a comparison, when they became independent, they were in a similar position to us. Most of their exports went to the rest of the UK. But over time, they have completely flipped that around. And I think they've gone from a place where more than 60% of their exports went to the UK to a point where it's now less than 20%. And that doesn't mean that they haven't grown their exports to the UK. They absolutely have. They've just grown their exports to the rest of the world much faster, to Europe and beyond. And I think having that breadth of focus, being able to export into Europe, export to the rest of the world, as well as continue to grow our exports into the rest of the UK, allows you a real tremendous opportunity to turbocharge your economic growth. As I say, it's something that the Ireland have done successfully, and they've got far less of the natural resources, we talked about universities and that talent that we have, the tremendous sectors that we've got in Scotland, be that food and drink, be it space we've talked about, be it our life science sector, be it our financial services, be it our tech sector. So many great sectors in Scotland that many countries are very jealous of. So we've got the really solid foundation there. It's about having the ability as an independent country to be able to focus on those trading relationships and build up those exports to where they could be.